Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I'm your host, George Mason, and I'm delighted to welcome to our program today Almas Muscatwalla. She is a tremendous advocate in the Dallas community who is serving the public good and doing so primarily as a volunteer, in fact. And Almas comes from the Muslim religion. The particular sect of Islam is the Ismaili Muslim, and we're going to talk about that in a few moments. But Almas, it's a delight to have you. It's always been fun to work with you in the community, and I'm so glad that you're having this conversation with us.
So first and foremost, I must thank you for having me. I'm absolutely honored because you know, George, how much I love you and I respect you. And while you may want to know my journey, with Dallas and with the North Texas community, I think that you are a key factor responsible for some of the things that I have learned and cultivated. And so, you know, there's this kind of mutual respect, and imagine two friends coming together, sharing, you know, how important our work is for the community, but yes, how it is also rooted in our faiths, right? So it's just incredible. So thank you for having me. I'm extremely honored to be here.
Well, I'm so glad. That's wonderful. Well, we first got to know one another at Thanksgiving Square.
That's correct.
Where you were working not only with the Interfaith Council at Thanksgiving Square, but you also became the executive director of what was called Faith Forward Dallas, which were faith leaders that had come together. And that group is barely hanging on now ever since you left, you know.
Yes.
But nonetheless, we worked together in that space, trying to bring together different faith leaders in the community, clergy and other active persons. And what we wanted to do is really practice pluralism, right? Mm-hmm. That is to say that we want everybody's faith tradition to be represented and to be active. And the fact that in Dallas, Texas, an Ismaili Muslim woman was leading that group is really a beautiful step forward for us. How did you get involved in that?
Oh man, this question just kind of brings back some amazing moments in my life. So, as you very rightly said that I was subbing, you know, for someone who was on the Interfaith Council at Thanksgiving Square. Right. And it led for me then becoming a permanent member of the Interfaith Council, to then me being invited to serve as the vice chair and then the chair, and then non-kind of voting member on the board of Thanksgiving, and then a voting member. And like and that just speaks to, I guess, somewhere where there's a reciprocity, somewhere I feel like Thanksgiving Square was living up, you know, to their kind of value of inclusion. Right. It was a need of the day at that time, you know. Yes. You know, so I see that kind of as an opportunity, but at the same time, you know, I come from my ethics and my values where I show commitment to the things that I do above and beyond, yes, you know. And so it kind of really came across, you know, it came together really well, their inclusion and my commitment to inclusion, but at the same time, my work ethic, you know, and my commitment to that kind of work. And I think then it led for me where I was beginning to realize that Interfaith Council was made up of some clergy group and some lay people. Right. So not necessarily every lay person had the capacity to take back what they were experiencing back to their congregation. Right. So it was like one person representation on the Interfaith Council. And that's when kind of the Faith Forward Dallas, you know, was originated. I remember knocking at each kind of congregation's door and inviting each person, each kind of clergy member, you know, to come and join Faith Forward Dallas. And you have played a critical role in the in like the time when the leadership was very, very critical. But in my early kind of stages, I had Bob Roberts, you know, from Keller Baptist Church. I had Robert Hunt from SMU, who kind of facilitated, because they were very clear that a non-clergy person, driving this with kind of clergy, is not going to play out very easily. They were trusting my vision, but they definitely wanted to anchor this conversation vis-a-vis someone who can kind of present, the mindset of the clergy group. And that's kind of where everything originated. And I feel like you're very right. The key to the entire process was pluralism.
Yes.
I think it was so rooted because we had people on Faith Forward Dallas. Some of them were pro-gun, some were opposing gun policies.
Yes.
Some are pro-life. There were some people who were pro-choice, and we sat on across the table and still went above and beyond our differences
Yes.
to see like a larger good. And I think the piece that probably the whole cycle of pluralism did not complete in that space, that in hindsight that I can talk, is that we were diverse in our theology. We came from different denominations. We were acting in response to some of the crises. But I think the understanding of each other's diversity was still kind of missing somewhere. I'm not talking about accepting each other's diversity, but being able to understand each other's viewpoint. And I feel like the crux of pluralism, as my spiritual leader, His Highness, would say, that diversity is the reality of life. We're born different by default. We weren't given a choice for me to be born like this and the way you were born. But pluralism is when I make an effort to get to understand you to the point that I create a space between you and I that we can coexist harmoniously.
Yes.
And once that space is created, we actually start to hurt when the other hurts.
So this goes to a conversation you and I had at the beginning of our relationship when you invited me to come and speak about my journey. And the subject was really about compassion.
Yes.
Empathy, compassion, and this is exactly what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Because, when you look at all of our religious traditions, people interpret who God is and what the heart of religion is differently. And it's not a difference that is necessarily Christians versus Jews versus Muslims versus Hindus. It's often Christians versus Christians, Muslims versus Muslims, Hindus versus... In other words, at the heart of the tradition that you and I share is this idea that the very nature of God is compassion.
Yes.
That God's
personifies
this compassion, this sense, and for a Christian, this is most beautifully represented in the idea that God has come to be one of us.
Yes.
Yes. In Jesus, who is the Son of God. And so we say that this is a perfect example of how we are supposed to walk in someone else's shoes, live inside someone else's skin, feel what other people are feeling, to know from the inside out, right? And as I have come to understand Ismaili Muslims, this is actually the heart of your faith tradition, right? Because I want to ask you to, say a few more words about that, but as I understand it, there is, in Islam, there are different denominations, you might say, and some of them tend to stress the external rules of things like, for instance, we're in Ramadan right now, and many Muslims across the world are fasting during these days. But in Ismaili tradition, the importance is more on the interior, the esoteric rather than the exoteric, right? That is what's happening in your spiritual life rather than just in the practice of simply depriving yourself of food. how does that translate in terms of your spiritual life? So take us a little bit into
Sure.
who Ismaili Muslims are
Yeah.
and where you fit on the worldwide scene of Islam.
Absolutely. I think so. First and foremost, as historically, I like to kind of situate the history part of it. Right after the death of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the authority, who's the successor, who's going to succeed after Prophet, was a critical question that the community was kind of encountered, and that's kind of where the community was trying to kind of grapple with that question and come with a kind of response. So that's kind of where you would say that, not immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad, but way after, their formation of two large, interpretations of Islam emerged in a kind of span of time. It didn't happen immediately. One school of thought, which is the Sunni interpretation, believes that right after the death of Prophet Muhammad, it was the Caliph, the ruler, that was responsible to lead the community. That was Abu Bakr, and the notion was that the authority was in that sense kind of secular.
Yes.
But at the same time, they believed that Prophet left the Holy Quran, his words, which is the Hadith, right? His kind of, and his Sunnah, the way he conducted himself, right? His entire disposition became an anchor for the entire Sunni community, right? Whereas the other interpretation, which is the Shia interpretation, believed that Prophet, Allah ordained Prophet to declare a successor, which was Hazrat Ali, Prophet's son-in-law. And for the Shias, it is the first Imam who was declared at Gadir-e Khum to be the successor and the first Imam of the Shia community. And so the notion of authority is what causes the two interpretations to emerge, because one was relying on the authority of the Quran, on the authority of the secular Caliph, and also in the authority of the scholars, as history kind of speaks to that as well. But as far as the Shias were concerned, they had a present Imam who was guiding them, so that's kind of the notion. Now, interestingly enough, in Shia interpretation, we've had several splits, right? Several kind of other denominations, and there are three major kind of interpretation. One was, I don't want to kind of go deeper into it, but there's like a 12ers who believed Imam until the 12th Imam, and their Imam is in occultation, who will emerge on the Day of Judgment. That's kind of one interpretation. They are the 12ers. And majority of the 12ers, you'll find them in Iran and, those places. The second interpretation, the split that happened was after the 21st Imam, where again, there's a split again happened, and that kind of denomination of Islam or Shia Islam is called Boras. There are Dawoodi Boras and Suleimania Boras, so that's kind of another split that happened. So, and interestingly enough, then it is the Shia Ismailis, Shia Ismaili, who are also called Nizari Ismailis. We are the only Shia interpretation, who have continued the lineage of that imamat through our present Imam, which is the 50th Imam, Shah Rahim al-Husseini Hazri Imam. And so the notion of the Imam in the Shia tradition is that he's responsible to interpret the faith, but also to be able to improve the quality of life of its community. And what makes Shia Ismailis distinct is having this present living Imam, who's called Hazar Imam, which means present Imam, and a living Imam who guides the community according to the time. So there's a context.
So would it be fair to say that whereas Sunni Muslims and some, like the 12 Shias, have a tendency to want to interpret for the community how it lives based upon the past, based upon their history and interpretation of the Quran and the like, and they want the culture to reflect how it was. There is more of a living, present interpretation about the current times that the Aga Khan, your spiritual leader, is interpreting for the Ismaili community.
Absolutely. And I would like to just say that, as you know, and you have met several of the imams from the Sunni interpretations, and so each of these imams become the scholars,
Yes.
of that particular mosque, and they become like in-house scholars, but they become the custodian
Yes.
of that particular, congregation. And I think one thing that I would like to say, rather than generalizing the analysis that you just made, because we would undermine the larger value of the Islam, which
Okay.
is Islam is a thinking faith.
Yes.
Islam is a civilization
Yes.
rather than a monolith.
Yes, yes,
right?
yes.
And so there are 1.8 billion Muslims that we are talking about.
Yes.
If you were to narrow it down and, explained it, like the way we are trying to kind of make sense of this 1.8 billion people, we would be doing injustice to the cultural nuances
Yes.
that are kind of tied and the diversity that is prevalent, right?
Which is the same within all
the
of our religions.
Christianities,
I mean, it would be
exactly.
very difficult to just say all Christians believe this, or
Exactly.
Okay. So, having said that, this interpretation of faith for you motivates your service.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the things we want to say to people is that there are lots of other Ismaili Muslims who are not nearly as active in the community as you are. And there are a lot of Christians that are not nearly as active as I am, say, for instance. So what is it about your personal experience of faith that moves you into these areas of service?
First and foremost, I must say that it comes down to like the way I was brought up and how it goes back to my childhood. But to large extent, His Highness, the Aga Khan, who's the 49th Imam, who I experienced for most part of my life,
Yes.
like majority. I mean, it's
Yes.
just the
He just
window of
recently
like
died, that's right.
window of like 15 days that I'm experiencing, my 50th Imam. My entire existence
Yes.
is rooted in his guidance.
Yes.
And so everything that I have done, everything that I do is anchored in my faith. And it partially goes to his guidance
Yes.
in the way he guided. And the kind of probably, as I say that I think about things, I take it to my heart, to my soul. And somewhere I think I want to preface this part where my mom, it's a story, okay?
Yes.
But it's an important one because it really, really situates kind of what makes me unique. And which is where like my dad had 6 sisters and we were two, me and my sister were born. So my dad was responsible for 8 women in his home.
Yes.
And so my brother was born before me. So after 6 sisters and my sister being there, my brother was born. So they were done as a family. It was like, that's all that I can manage, like 6 sisters and 2 of my kids, 1 daughter, 1 son, good to go. Let's kind of wrap it up. But I was conceived.
Yes.
And so my mom says this, it's a funny story, but she said that she tried really hard not to have me. So in good old days, like she kind of tried not to have me. But then once I was born,
Yes.
despite her trying hard not to have me, after I was already conceived, she just thought that I was created for a bigger reason. It was
Ooh.
not just my birth is not tied to just physical, birth. It has a bigger meaning and it has a different purpose in my life.
Lovely.
And I think there's a tradition in our faith tradition where where it's a part of every tradition, right? You say in larger Muslim context, we say zakat, which is like offerings that the Muslim makes. But in our context, there's some kind of offering that we offer to the Imam of the time. And my mom offered me as that zakat or as that offering to the Imam of the time,
Okay.
to Imam Shah Karim,
Yes.
that this is the person who's going to be devoting her
Wow.
entire life
Wow.
at the service of the community.
Yes.
And somewhere that, to a very young child growing up,
Right.
gave a purpose,
Well.
which is way different than something that you cultivate through your education or through your through
Yes.
your other experiences,
Yes.
through your educational academic experiences.
Beautiful.
This experience was completely different, and my entire life she had no qualms to share that story with me.
Yes.
And I lived through that story, but each time it reiterated and reconfirmed my purpose in life to be able to serve
Yes.
the community. And then to have a faith tradition that supported my
Yes.
existence
Yes.
so beautifully,
Right.
where ethics are important, rituals are important, but not to the point that it suffocates me. It is a very liberating faith
Yes.
tradition where my actualization of my potential is as important as the sajda or the offering that I give in a ritualistic form. Like,
Yes.
rituals are important, but my actualization to my ultimate potential is an expression of my faith. Learning and growing and becoming a person that I was destined to become is part of my faith, and that's kind of
Well, and I think many people listening to this would probably be surprised that there is a Muslim community that celebrates and promotes women to take this leadership kind of role, right?
Absolutely,
I think it's
absolutely.
important to say. Now, you are involved in Dallas Responds, which is a welcoming ministry to immigrants. Now, I think most people listening to you speak know that you live in North Dallas, but you really don't have a Texas accent.
I'm a hardcore Indian.
You're a hardcore Indian, a real Indian.
Real
Yes,
Indian.
exactly. And so you are an immigrant yourself. All right. So how much of your immigrant experience connects to your mission to care for immigrants in the work you're doing?
I think to the core, right? I mean, my mom lived with me for 20 years, and she got her green card after close to 20 years. And the first time when I took her to India, she already had Alzheimer's, so she couldn't see or understand the same place that where she was born or she grew
Yes.
up. And not only that, but being an immigrant, and I was one of the privileged immigrant. Let me kind of put that right off the bat, that it wasn't an easy journey, because our journey as an immigrant was, Aziz wanted to do, my husband was more interested in doing business. He didn't come in a professional capacity. He came more with the resources, to invest and, to create a business opportunity. And he supported his employees who became legal before we did.
I see. Okay.
And so it just kind of speaks to how broken a system is.
Yes.
Where every time as my young kids would travel, so we were able to travel on that parole, letter. So every time we would travel, we were always pulled in a separate room for our immigration. And my kids would just not fathom that they're always kind of pulled on the side and
Yes.
stigmatized that we're doing something wrong. And after 9/11, being Muslim and the names Aziz and Muscatwalla wasn't easy,
Right.
to travel, where the scrutiny that you would have to go through was a whole different experience. So, so being an immigrant, this is very close to my heart, not just in my personal experience, also through my lived experience of my mom, who was not even able to recognize
Yes.
her country, and she passed away a year after.
Right.
So there was not much time left for her to travel again and see, or travel when she had her senses. So every time when I look at the migrant, I can relate through their story, because we came to this country to give a better quality of life to our children. Coming from India, as I said, we were very privileged, but I think a privileged person also can come to America for a better quality of life, and they become contributing members. I'm an exemplar of an immigrant who's devoting her 24/7 to
Yes.
give it back to make this city a better.
I think in the current rhetoric in our country politically, this is lost. We
It is.
don't see the defense of the immigrant as being a contributing member of society, offering something to the American culture, how they are not just economically paying taxes and being consumers and serving economically, but they are also contributing, as you are,
Absolutely.
to the common good, to showing compassion and being involved in the community. And I think it's important that we begin to tell that other story, because right now the borders are closing and people are being turned away, and those who are already here are often not appreciated because of their sense of being different.
Yes, yes. And I think that's heartbreaking, because none of us can claim to be, original residents of this country, right? We're
Yes.
all immigrants in that
Yes.
sense. And I think our forefathers, situated the value of this country. It kind of relied on this principle of welcoming the stranger, and our faith traditions
Yes.
encourage that as well. So I cannot fathom, and if sometimes I also be the devil's advocate and kind of think from logistics standpoint, that like think about how many Palestinians have been received in Jordan, or if further disaster happens in that region, and we have this large segment of immigrants. Somewhere, someone needs to think about what is going to happen to them.
Yes.
Where are they going to go? So if we were to look at this immigration policy not from your territorial point of view, from your border point of view, but from a human point of view,
Yes.
and look at it as a global issue that needs a collective, decision-making process, then our even if we were not anchoring on how well
Yes.
they can be contributing, even if you don't like the idea, but you just have to logistically think
Yes.
how the world would operate.
Yes.
You can push. So it's like a water, right? You create a dam, but if there's an overflow of the water, somewhere the dam is going to break apart,
Right.
and you're going to have an influx
Yes.
of people. But are you? And that's kind of where the question is. The question is how well we're supporting being the country, the capacity that we have as a country.
Yes.
Are we doing? If you don't want immigrants, are you then contributing to those countries to improving their state of
okay.
affairs so they become self-sufficient?
Yes.
If you're not doing that,
Which
and
we've
you
just
don't
cut
want
off
them,
USAID.
then
Yes, right.
then you're putting yourself up for failure, not just for those people, because you're interconnected.
Yes.
We are so
So,
interconnected,
yes.
and COVID has told us that. COVID was the best example for us to recognize how connected this world is. And we are not recognizing that through these human body,
Yes.
okay? And we're not collectively thinking and addressing that issue, and we're trying to be territorial, and it's not going to, somewhere that influx is going to trickle
Yes.
in your spaces without you having any control of that situation. And so the point of the matter is, while compassion and empathy and doing good and welcoming the stranger is the values that we want to anchor, but I would also encourage and invite people who are opposed to the idea that there is some collective thinking that needs to be done on this subject matter. And I feel I don't see a body of people doing that.
Okay.
I just struggle to see anywhere, and I think the only hope, because that's the only, my 2025, two words that I'm relying on is hope and curiosity.
Okay.
And in the midst of this trauma, I'm still want to anchor on hope that, as my 49th Imam would have said, that when your government fails and when the democracies in these countries fail, the only hope for everybody around is the role of civil society. It's the role of ordinary people coming together, picking up the load and doing the good that they can. And that's where organizations like yours, organizations like Dallas Response, organizations like Dallas Area Interfaith, I mean, until a collective vision is cultivated or developed, for what our entire community, our entire society is going to look like. Where do we see ourselves, as a human society? Until someone thinks about that, I think in our little spaces, we have to continue doing the work that we do.
Well, you have just actually put the period onto this conversation, because you basically said what the whole purpose of these conversations is about. An invitation for people to find where is their place.
Yes.
You don't have to solve all the political questions in Washington or in Austin, but you have a neighbor. You have a story that you can live, and you have a faith that motivates you. Find a place to serve, and do it with compassion and care for especially those who are most vulnerable. Almas Muscatwalla, you do that as a beautiful example to us. Thank you for being on Good God.
Thank you. Thank you, George. Thank you for having me. I appreciate you.